Teaching phonics and decoding. In this lesson, our key question will be, how do we give kids the best start down the road to the code? Let's begin with a definition. What is phonics? Well, phonics is a method of teaching people to read by training them to associate written letters with their sounds. You've already learned that phonemic awareness is just when we're dealing at the sound level. So the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics is that phonics is actually dealing with the written letters and their association with the sounds. One proven program that's very effective is the Jolly Phonics program. And it is a wonderful thing that many teachers use it in kindergarten and grade 1 to teach phonics. The next thing we'll look at is what is decoding. Decoding involves translating printed words into sounds. That's a fancy way to say reading. So decoding is another word for reading. Encoding involves using individual sounds to build and write words, otherwise known as spelling. When we look at the reading pyramid, we already know that phonemic awareness is at the base. We have to have this awareness of sounds. And the idea that sounds in a word, there's individual sounds within that one word. So a word can come apart and come back together. When we see phonics and decoding, phonics and reading, that forms the second layer of the reading pyramid. So is there an order in which the sounds of English should be taught? The answer is yes. Duncan Milne has done a wealth of research on this topic, and he has created the Phonics Progression charts that tell us the order that's the best order to teach the sounds in. He has 5 phases of this phonics progression, and in the first phase, it begins before the child has even been taught any formal reading. It begins with conversations with their parents and being read to, by naming objects and actions and chanting nursery rhymes, by learning to spell their own name. Once we begin the formal teaching of reading, of the sounds, then there is an order that we want to teach these in. And Duncan Milne tells us that S, A, T, and P will be the first 4 sounds that we will teach. We will use all closed syllables as we teach this, so that the A is making the ah sound. And I will teach you what a closed syllable is in the next session, so don't worry too much about it right now. Later on in phase 3, we get to where things get trickier, and we have vowel teams. For example, in week 4, we'll be working with AI. When 2 vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. So the A is going to say its long A sound, as in wait, hail. Then in the next week, we'll do the 2 E's, where the 2 E's are going walking. And so basically, you need something to force the vowel to say its name. And when 2 vowels walk together, sometimes that happens. Or in week 5, we'll introduce the situation where 2 vowels can go walking and they can make a brand new sound, as in a diphthong. So OI makes the OI sound. There are 44 different phonemes in English, 44 different sounds, and we'll teach them in order from easiest to hardest. These 44 sounds can be written in multiple ways. So we have many more ways to write the sounds than we actually have sounds. For example, can be written in many different ways. We could write it with just one single M, as in monkey. Sometimes the M gets doubled, as in summer. Sometimes the M is followed by a B, as in climb. Or it could be followed by an N, as in autumn. Or an L could precede it, as in palm. So we have 44 phonemes, 44 sounds, and 250 ways to write those sounds. Each way that we use to write it is called a grapheme. When we teach these sounds, we know that we're dealing with students, with dyslexic students who have a poor weak circuit in the lower brain circuit. So what we want to do is we want to go in through a strong circuit when we're teaching new information. One of the best ways to do that is using kinesthetic teaching methods. We'll use their body. There are 4 different modalities that we can tap into when we're using kinesthetic teaching methods. One is the auditory modality, hearing. One is the visual modality, seeing. One is the oral kinesthetic modality, where we're feeling what the sound feels like in our throat. And we'll think about what our tongue is doing and what our jaw is doing to make a sound. And then one is the manual kinesthetic modality. In this presentation, we'll go through each of the different modalities and teach you a method to use each one. So let's get started. We'll begin. Just imagine that we're teaching a student about a new letter-sound relationship. We'll say P for the letter P is the sound that we're working on today. And we'll begin with an auditory discovery. So we'll give the student a word list. And we'll ask the student to listen carefully as the teacher reads the list. And we'll have the student look at the teacher's lips and mouth as they make the words. We'll say pat, past, pats, tap, spat, sap, tap, stap. We'll call and repeat the 8 words. And then what we want is the student to be able to hear that P sound in the different parts. There's some of the words will have it at the beginning, some will have it at the middle, and some will have it at the end. We'll ask the student if they've ever heard of the word stap, and I don't think they will because it's a nonsense word. We'll tell them that it's just a made-up word and that in our lessons we will often use a few nonsense words. The reason that we throw in the nonsense words is because when we work on bigger words, there will often be a nonsense syllable, like it'll be a syllable within a larger word that won't actually be a word on its own. For example, fantastic. Tas is not a word on its own, so that would be a useful one for the student to have encountered on a word list somewhere. We'll ask the student what consonant sound are they hearing in every word. Pat, past, pats. And hopefully they'll tell us P. Then after they identify, we'll say yes, and we'll say the sound that we're going to work on in today's lesson is P. That's all there is to it. So you have done the auditory kinesthetic method there. This one's covered. We just did it. And now let's move on to what the visual modality looks like. When I teach a new sound, I use all 4 parts in my lesson. So we'll go back to that list. I shortened it here because I wanted the word list to reflect words that a very beginner reader could actually read. So I took out a word like past, which has a blend in it. So I give the student a list of words, mostly ones that they just heard. And I ask the student to circle the letter that corresponds to the P sound with their favorite color. Tell them to watch out because you are not asking them to read the words. They are only to circle the letter. If the student needs, you could give a demonstration by circling the P in the first letter of Pat. And then as the student circles the letter, the teacher reads the word. And that's it. So now we've done the auditory modality and the visual modality, and we'll move on to the oral kinesthetic. This is where we want to teach the student how to feel the sound. So explain to the student, we're going to work together to feel what's happening in our throat and mouth when we pronounce the sound P. Remember that there are 4 things that may move in your throat and in your mouth when you say a sound. Your tongue can move, your lips can move, your jaw can move, and your vocal cords can move. And the vocal cords are in the throat, and they're like 2 strings of a guitar. Sometimes they vibrate, and sometimes they don't. Ask the student to put both of their hands on either side of their neck. Tell the student that they're going to compare the following sounds. First, they'll feel how ah feels in their throat. Then they'll feel t as in tiger. And then they'll try to feel P as in pat. And we're going to look at how, we'll try to feel how each of the sounds feels different when we make it. What are our lips doing? What is our tongue doing? What's our jaw doing? And what's our vocal cords doing? We'll ask the student if they notice the difference between the 3 sounds. The teacher will say, when you say ah, what do you feel in your throat? And then you guys can experiment with that. Do you feel anything? Well, yes. And the student will comment on what they feel. They might say, oh, my vocal cords are vibrating. Ah. They might say that their mouth is open. And they might say their jaw fell open when that happened. You'll do the exercise again for the different sounds. And the student will explain what they're feeling. You'll say, can you feel that when you pronounce ah in your throat, there's a trembling feeling, a vibrating feeling? When you pronounce t in your throat, is it trembling? The answer is no. The ah sound does not tickle the lips because the mouth is open. P does not make your vocal cords move. When a sound doesn't move the vocal cords, we call that a motor off sound. P starts with a puff of air that comes out to make the sound, whereas ah, you can feel the throat vibrating, so the ah has a motor on. We'll tell the student that now we want to look at what is happening in the mouth. Ask the student to move their tongue around to show the tongue can go in lots of different directions. Explain that the tongue remains in the mouth while we're making sounds, and say, so let's see where the tongue is in the mouth when we pronounce the sound ah. I mean, is it resting on the bottom of the mouth? Is it at the top of the mouth? Does it move? Once that's complete, you'll have the student do the same process with t and p. Ask the student to make each of those sounds ah, t, p, one after another. Ask the student if they can feel their tongue moving in their mouth. The teacher will say, when you pronounce as an apple, your tongue is at the bottom of your mouth. When we pronounce the sound ah, is the tongue forward? At the back of the mouth? Where is it? And let the student answer. Is it at the top? Is it at the bottom? Let the student answer. So it's a great idea just to pose questions to the student and then let them explore and then try and answer on their own. Lastly, we'll have the student focus on the teeth and the lips. The teacher will ask the student to look at the teacher's mouth and note the differences when he or she is saying the sounds of ah, t, and p. Ask the student to verbalize what they're seeing. The student should say that the lips are open and stay open when we're saying ah. They should say that the lips start slightly open and then open wider as the jaw falls open when saying t. And finally, the student should note that the lips start closed for p. After doing all that, we'll do a quick recap for our target sound, which is p. And we'll just make sure that the students figured out that the vocal cords are a motor off sound, so we're not vibrating the vocal cords. The teeth start in a slightly open position, and the lips are closed and then open as the jaw drops, making a puff of air come out. P. That may seem overwhelming. You want to make sure that you're doing it absolutely right. So when I was beginning, I would often go to Rachel's English at this website, and she is a speech pathologist who's just wonderful, and she will give you most of the sounds, like a description that you can use so that you're making sure that you're telling the student the proper information. So we've done the auditory modality, where we read the list and had the student try and identify p on the list. We did the visual modality, where the student circled the p, the letter p, in all the words. Then we did the oral kinesthetic modality, where we had the student put their hands on the side of their throat and try to feel what making the sounds feels like. And now we'll move on to the last modality, the manual kinesthetic modality. This is where we'll have the student make a letter card, and the letter card will become one of many that will become a card pack for them. Later on, we'll use this card pack in the visual drills and the auditory drills that I'll teach you later on in the course. To do this, we take an index card, and I give a blank index card to the student, and then I have one that I make. And I explain to the student that we're going to create a letter card to remember the p sound. I'll ask the student to think of words that have p in them. And then we'll also say, does the sound ever change, or is it always the same? Because we know in English that there are some symbols that have more than one sound. For example, the letter C could be k as in cat, or s as in city. With p, the answer is that it never changes. The student will write down a small letter P in the center of their card, and they'll put a little 1 beside it to show that there's only one sound that letter makes. Then in the corner, I usually do the bottom left corner, the student will write the capital symbol for P on the card. On the back of the card, the student will make one picture of something that begins with the letter P. For example, maybe they'd make a picture of a pie, and then the teacher would tell them how to write pie. They don't have to spell this, obviously, because they wouldn't have the skills to do that. And then with the manual kinesthetic modality, we'll go back to the list. And with many students, you wouldn't use the blends at the beginning because they wouldn't be ready for that. So I would just probably have like pat, tap, sap. And we'll have these colored tiles that don't have any graphemes on them because we've got the words that are on the list. And we'll just have the student put down, if I wanted that student to practice pat, they'd say P and put down a tile underneath the P. Then put down a tile and say A, put down a tile and say T. And then they touch the tiles and they'd say P, A, T. And hopefully they'll blend it together and come up with pat. These ones here, they would not be fair because you just want to focus on the simple C, V, C words, which is consonant, vowel, consonant for the very beginners. And let's just go on. So you've learned about the 4 different modalities of teaching with the kinesthetic method. And now I'm going to show you a drill that I use in every lesson actually. It's called the letter tile drill. And I use this in the middle of my lesson when I'm working on reading. And it's the first thing I do when I'm teaching a student to read a word. This is a kinesthetic method for doing that. So as we talked about before, we spread our tiles out in a rainbow shape in alphabetical order. And if I want to teach a student to read a word, here's what I do. Let's say I want to teach them the word sap. I don't tell them that's the word. Instead, I just say, can you say the sound S? And then the student says the sound. And now I know that the student actually knows the sound. Then I say, can you find the letter that makes the sound S? The student finds that correct letter and pulls it into the space in front of them. Then I repeat this, so I say, can you find or can you say the sound A? And the student says the sound. And I say, can you find the letter that makes the sound A? The student finds the correct one and pulls it in the space in front of them. And then I say, can you find the sound P? The student says the sound. And I say, can you find the letter that makes the sound P? The student finds the correct letter, and now they should have 3 letters in front of them. The teacher says, using 2 fingers, can you tap each tile and say each sound? So they would say S, A, P. And then I might say, try it again a little faster. Sap, sap. And there'll come this beautiful moment where the student will read the word. So we'll ask the student, can you say the word? And they might say sap. That's the hope. If they do, then we'll ask the student if they can use it in a sentence. And that is how you teach a student to read a word. If you're in a group setting right now, you could get together with a partner and use any of the sample words and just practice teaching a student how to read a word, which is your partner. Now that you've done that, we are going to teach a student to write a word. You'll see that this is different than how we teach a student to read a word. So we have the same letters out in our rainbow shape in alphabetical order, but in this case, instead of giving the students the individual sounds, I give them the word. And that's the difference between teaching someone to read a word and teaching someone to write a word. So I will say, I'm going to ask you to spell a word. The word is cup. Can you repeat the word? The student says cup. The teacher says, can you use the word cup in a sentence? You want to do this because you want to make sure that that student knows what word they're going to try to spell here. The teacher says, what is the first sound that you hear in cup? The student will say k, and hopefully they'll pull the correct sound in front of him or her. The teacher says, what is the next sound? And sorry, that should be that you hear in the word cup. You wrote the wrong word there, I wrote pat. And they would hopefully say and pull the correct symbol for And then you'll say, what is the last word that you hear in the word cup? And hopefully they will pull the P. Then you'll say, using 2 fingers, can you tap each tile and say each sound? The teacher will ask the student to read the word. And then you could also ask the student to use it in a sentence. But let's say things don't go exactly as you planned. What if the student identifies the incorrect letter for a sound? Then we have some blocking strategies. This is where those cards that we made using the kinesthetic method come in. We have their card pile. So if they incorrectly identified P, for example, then we could take that keyword from their card, because we know they made the keyword pie for the letter card P. And so we would say, think of your keyword for the letter sound. One example of this is I had a student who struggled with remembering the sound associated with the grapheme QU, qu. But she had a brother named Quentin, and this association was very helpful for her. So you ask the student to say the keyword. Or if they don't know the keyword, you can have them pull out their card and they can turn it over and find their keyword. And then what sound does that letter make, or that letter combo make? If the student answers incorrectly, the teacher will compare the 2 sounds for the student by saying, listen to these 2 sounds and tell me if they're the same or not. The student should be able to hear that the 2 sounds are not the same. If they seem unsure, the teacher will ask the student to place their hands on their throat, and then you can use the oral kinesthetic method to help the student feel the difference between the sounds. And once the confusion is resolved, the student will pull down the correct letter tile and off you go. Here's a key point from what we've learned today. Will the multisensory teaching methods that you learned about in this lesson teach students to both read and write? The answer is yes. The reason for that is, well, there's several reasons. The main one is that it's because we're working with graphemes, letters. So when we actually work with the letters, then we're working on writing. So number 1, we're using strong kinesthetic pathways to strengthen the phonetic awareness. 2, they're being taught in a systematic and progressive way because we're following the Milne progression. And 3, we're working with graphemes letters in a multisensory way. And by working with the actual letters, we are improving their spelling. Thank you.